Hruki had always been a quiet soul. The kind of person who observed the world from a distance, never truly part of it, but always longing to understand it. He carried a heavy heart, one that had been broken 2 years ago by the sudden passing of his childhood friend, Aoi. Ai had been more than a friend to him, she was the light in his world, the spark that kept him going through even the darkest days. Her death had shattered everything, and since then, Hruki had felt empty, disconnected, as though he were drifting through life without a clear direction. He had spent so many days in a haze of memories, trapped in the past, never allowing himself to heal. It was on one of those melancholic autumn evenings that Hruki found himself walking home through a forgotten park, lost in his own thoughts. The cool breeze ruffled the golden leaves scattered on the ground, and everything around him seemed to echo with the sadness he had carried for so long. But then, something unusual caught his attention. A girl was standing beneath a tree, her face hidden behind a large umbrella. She was reading a book, completely absorbed in the pages as if the world around her didn't exist. Hruki stopped in his tracks. There was something about her presence, something both familiar and strange, that tugged at his heart. The autumn leaves swirled around her, in a gentle dance, as if the wind itself was entranced by her. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew the umbrella out of her hands, and it rolled toward Hruki. Without thinking, he reached out to catch it. As he did, the girl turned and looked at him, her eyes shimmering with an intensity that made him pause. She was beautiful, but it was her eyes that stood out. There was something in them that felt like a distant memory, something he couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and warm, pulling him out of his reverie. Hruki nodded, too stunned to speak. As he handed the umbrella back to her, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was almost as if he knew her, though he was certain they had never met before. She smiled at him, and for a moment, the heaviness of his grief seemed to lighten. "I'm Hannah," she introduced herself, and Hruki forced a smile in return. He felt an inexplicable pull toward her, as though their meeting had not been a mere accident. He quickly dismissed the thought, not wanting to make too much of it. After all, Ai was gone, and no one could ever replace her. But over the next few days, Hruki couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He found himself drawn to the park each evening, where Hannah would always be there, sitting beneath the same tree, reading the same book. She never seemed to notice him at first, but there was a sense of comfort in her quiet presence. Each time he saw her, his heart would flutter, and though he didn't fully understand why, he felt as though she was somehow tied to something deep within him. One evening, as Hruki lingered at the edge of the park, he heard her voice, soft yet clear, as though she had been waiting for him to arrive. "You seem like someone who's carrying a heavy weight," she said, her gaze meeting his. "Is it the kind of weight you can never put down?" Hruki froze, his breath catching in his throat. She didn't wait for him to respond but continued, "You look like you've lost someone who meant everything to you. You carry their memory, but you've forgotten to carry yourself." It was as if Hannah had seen straight into his soul. Hruki felt exposed, vulnerable, and for a moment, he couldn't hide the pain that he had buried so deeply. He looked away, unsure of how to respond, but then he found himself speaking, almost without thinking. "I lost someone, Aoi," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was everything to me. I don't know how to move on." Hannah smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's hard, isn't it, letting go of the past? But sometimes, the past doesn't want to be remembered in sorrow. It wants to be remembered in love." Hruki blinked, confused by her words. He had always thought that by holding on to Oyo memory, he was honoring her. But now, he wasn't so sure. Maybe you're not meant to hold on to the past forever, Hannah continued, her voice tender but firm. Maybe the memories are meant to guide you, not keep you from living. You have to let yourself live again, Krucky. You're still here. You're still breathing. And there's more for you than just this pain. Kruk's heart trembled as her words sank in. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of his grief felt too heavy to shake off. Still, there was something about Hannah, something in the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made him feel like he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. As the days passed, Krucky found himself returning to the park again and again, hoping to see Hannah. She always seemed to be there, as though waiting for him, sharing bits of her own life with him as they sat together under the trees. She spoke of her dreams, her fears, and the things that made her smile. And slowly, Krucky began to feel the weight on his shoulders lighten. One evening, as the rain began to pour, Krucky found Hannah sitting beneath the tree again, soaked to the bone but still reading her book. Without thinking, he rushed over to her, holding out his jacket to shield her from the rain. But Hannah just looked up at him, with a serene smile. "It's just a storm," she said softly. "Like the storms in our hearts. They pass eventually." Krucky stood there, stunned by her words. He had been living in a storm for so long, trapped in the chaos of his grief. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let it pass. I think I understand now," Krucky said quietly. "I've been holding on to her for so long that I forgot how to live for myself." Hannah's smile deepened, and she placed a hand gently on his arm. "That's all I wanted to remind you of," she said. "Oil love will always be with you, but you can still live your life. Don't let the storm keep you from seeing the sunshine." The next day, Krucky went to the small memorial where Aoi had once visited. He sat there, reflecting on their time together, but this time, there was no overwhelming sadness. Instead, he felt a quiet peace, a sense of closure he had never thought possible. He returned to the park that evening, hoping to see Hannah one last time. But she was gone. There was no sign of her, just the familiar tree swaying in the breeze. As he stood there, unsure of what to do, a single leaf drifted down from the tree. On it was a message, written in delicate handwriting, "Thank you for remembering. The past and the future are one, and you'll find your way." Krucky smiled softly, understanding at last that Hannah had been more than just a girl in the park. She had been a guide, a whisper from the past, reminding him that the future was waiting for him. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, oil laughter, distant yet close, as if she were whispering, "You're going to be okay." And for the first time in years, Krucky truly believed it.